Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cash Up, a weekly show where we converse with amazing folks in DFIR. And today I'm so excited to be joined by my friend, Lodrina Cherne. Lodrina is a principal security advocate with Cybereason and a SANS certified instructor teaching Forensics 500. Prior to her work with Cybereason, she worked as a forensic consultant. She's also a technical researcher with the Shorenstein Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. She regularly contributes to forensics projects, having been a contributor to both the Forensic Forecast Award-winning This Week in Forensics and the Forensic Wiki. She's also a member of the GIAC Advisory Board. Her work in computer forensic consulting at Arsenal was across a myriad of devices and types of cases, everything from Windows to Mac, Android, and iOS, and covering cases from IP theft to employment disputes to evidence of tampering. She holds a variety of industry certifications, including the GCFE, GCFA, and GASF, as well as a BS in computer science from Boston University. She has twice been awarded a Lethal Forensicator coin. She's also an avid volunteer, including as a volunteer case reviewer for the Massachusetts Department of Children and Family and as a Security and Privacy Committee reviewer for the Grace Hopper celebration. She's also a volunteer for Operation Safe Escape, helping victims of technologically facilitated abuse. She's a regular presenter, having spoken on location-based apps and stalkerware at RSA Conference in 2019. She gave an incredible keynote at the SANS DFIR Summit 2020 on learning at scale. And she's giving the keynote at the upcoming BIPOC and Cybersecurity Forum on Thursday, October 1st. I'm registered for that conference, really looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. It's no wonder her talent has been recognized, and she was named to SC Magazine's Women in IT Security 2019 issue in the Women to Watch category. She's a brilliant advocate for inclusivity. She wrote a brilliant post about this yesterday on Cybereason's blog that I hope you check out. In addition to being a friend and an accomplished forensicator, Lodrina is an accomplished power lifter, having been a member of Team USA for it's crazy. She's won international awards for her powerlifting. And with that, Lodrina. Hi, Lodrina.
Wow, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I am going to bottle that up and just use it as a ray of sunlight whenever I need a little pick-me-up. Thank you so much.
And you should, because you have done so much incredible work, and you have done so much in terms of the way you share, and you take all of the knowledge and skills that you have as a technical prowess, and you not only use those for the normal good that digital forensics folks do in helping crime and helping victims and child abuse and companies on their worst day. Like, we help people with our job, but you take it this other level and say, how can I use my skills to do the most good to make this world better? And I just admire you for it. And it is a pleasure to have you as a guest and to call you a friend. So,
thank you.
So, how did you get here?
Oh, where do I start? I want to start by sharing that most of what you just shared, if you told me 3 years ago that I would be having this wonderful introduction with all of these things on my CV and I'd be sitting in the office, outside of downtown Boston. This is like a real skyline.
It looks like a virtual background for the record, but yeah. I know that's a real conference room.
Yeah, so this is a real skyline behind me, and I have the option, and I made the choice to come into the office today and get a little change of scenery and suck up all the bandwidth. If you told me that this would be my introduction 3 years ago, I might not believe you. I might have laughed at you.
Can I interrupt? 3 years ago, you and I had a meal together. You were actually, this was at the SANS DFIR Summit in Austin, and you were being very cautious about what you were eating because you were actually training at the time too. You were being very particular about your proteins and all that stuff. I found it. And I remember sitting down and talking to you, and we had this amazing conversation about your thoughts and your career and your ambition, and it would not have surprised me to give you this introduction.
Oh.
That makes sense.
It does. Oh, I can totally picture what I was eating too. I was probably eating like plain broccoli and like some baked fish or
You
something
had plain broccoli and baked salmon. I absolutely remember what you were eating because you were explaining to me why it was so important and what what you were doing, and I just thought I was like blown away that you were doing that and training because you were going straight from the summit to a competition, I believe, and yeah,
I was. Oh my gosh! Remember the days where we traveled? But this is, I think,
wait, what? We used to do what?
This is a really good place to start because, like, you've just talked about all this forensic, techie, digital stuff that I really love doing and I care a lot about. But at the same time, I know there's a bunch of people listening who are like, I'm trying to get into forensics. Like, maybe you just are starting a program or exploring the field, or maybe you just graduated from a program last semester and you're trying to figure out how to job hunt and get that first job so you can start filling up the things, right? And I think it's fair to say that you don't have to be a forensics person from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep.
Yes.
Like, yeah, and I shared on a call with one of my teammates yesterday. I said, I'm doing this, this, and that. And after this call, I am going to leave for the gym, even though it's not 5 o'clock yet, because that is the most important thing in my day, period. Is like, it's very important to me to get some mental and physical exercise so that I can sit down and go through the hundreds of pages PDFs I'm reading, or put that PowerPoint together, or stare at that hex. And, so I want to start there. Is I can share with you what my journey is, which I feel like is atypical. And
there is no such thing as a typical journey in this field. I have yet to speak to anyone who's had a typical journey.
I think that is very fair to say as well. Yes. So if you're looking for typical and you're looking at what I've done so far, take it with a grain of salt and take it in the context of me being a person who has lots of other interests. And how do you use those other things in your life to get you excited and to get you energized about trying to read 120 blog links this week about the latest news that's came out in malware. We can talk about that later, but
right.
So it's all part of this same puzzle. I'll share with you kind of the Cliff Notes version first, and then we can dive in, which is, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area during the first .com boom. So I've always been somebody who's techie. I was lucky enough as a teenager. This is something that I think I have taken off my LinkedIn since. Worked for AOL, worked for a number of their digital properties, was programming in Rain Man, which I don't know if I can call them my first programming language. It was probably C, but Rain Man, in all capitals, was the programming language behind the AOL platform content back in the day. And that was kind of normal for me to just be kind of around technology, meeting people. I lived down the street from the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I grew up in San Francisco. They're also in the heart of San Francisco. I
was talking about Ietf challenges to CBP seizure last night in my class. So I was like all over Electronic Foundation Frontier references last night in my teaching. So that's hysterical.
Oh my gosh. And we should talk about their cooperating technologists mailing list as something that folks in DFIR might want to look at today. But, they were down the street from me. And when I went to college out in Boston, I took some time off of being in Boston, went back to San Francisco and hung out at the EFF. I was their activism intern for part of my college.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, to back up, as somebody who was in tech, kind of around tech, I had a lot of great support for like, hey, here's this young woman who's interested in whatever it was I was interested in, whatever was in the news, whatever was around me, and feel so lucky to have had that support when I was younger. And I've been sharing more and more about the struggles that I had when I got into college. Because as somebody who was techie in that time frame, I didn't really know what the next step was for me. I wasn't one of these kids you hear about who founded some Silicon Valley company who kind of, finished high school and just started a company. That wasn't me.
Right.
But I was techie and I was looking for the next step. And to me, the next step was college.
Right.
Now, this is a pretty loaded statement because the next step being college has a lot of layers to it. I'm somebody who's a first generation college graduate. And even before that, first generation high school graduate.
Same.
And we can go back even further.
Yes.
So, I had a lot of these great techie contacts when I was younger. And then I moved across the country. I went to college. I pursued a computer science degree because that seemed like the obvious option at the time. Realized that programming was not for me. Did not like that kind of problem solving where one semicolon missing means that everything else around it doesn't work. That was not my jam. But I persevered because there were things I really enjoyed about it. I loved my cryptography class that I took senior year. I love puzzle solving. I can trace DES boxes by hand. You want me to trace through that by hand? I will do it day in and day out, and that's puzzle solving. So I'm glossing over a lot of stuff here, but let's just say college was a pretty hard time for me. I took the whole 7 years allotted to me because of some of these things I mentioned. I took time off. I went back home. I was trying to figure out, how do I deal with finishing this degree that I really want to finish? But I don't know what I'm going to do after this.
Right.
So, finished my degree. One of the hardest things I've done in my life, and, one of the proudest things I've done. Thank you. Yeah. And here's the really lucky part. Even though when I finished college, I lost some of that network, and I think didn't gain much of a network as I went through my degree because I took so long to do it. I lost a lot of that cohort that I came in with. I had one great thing going for me, which is I'm curious. Actually, two. And I live in Boston, right? So real world Boston skyline behind me. So there's a lot of schools around here where I could do continuing ed. Absolutely. I figured out I learn really well in classrooms. So that's my thing. I wanted to show up somewhere and be taught. And so I explored a lot of other things. I said, how can I be technical and how do I get out behind that keyboard, right?
Yes.
So I think, let's see what I explored. I looked into technical writing.
Oh.
So took a few classes in that. I thought about teaching.
I'm gonna tell you that technical writing was my 4.0 buster in my undergrad. I got a B in technical writing. I thought I did great on it. My teacher, when I gave my final oral presentation about my technical writing, said I spoke too quick and reduced me to a B. That's okay. Technical. So I loved my project though. Neither here nor there. I could go on about. I wrote a technical paper on a paperclip. Not paperclip. No. I'm like forgetting totally. It was fingernail clippers because I wrote the paper from the perspective of Nail Biters Anonymous. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, the one thing that I remember from those classes I took is that I was writing documentation on how to navigate a software program. Okay. And I said something like, hit the button. And the feedback I got was, no hitting, please. So saying things just something like saying, click this button or hover your mouse over this button and then select it. There's a lot of nuance to it.
I hate to jump around, but I think you're bringing up something really important that I know we wanted to talk about, and it's something that was in your blog yesterday. And you're getting into the nuance of language and its importance. And this is something that I've had a lot of self-discovery about recently, and I've been reviewing my own writing. I know we've been doing this internally at Magnet. We have a whole team working on this with both our outward and internal. But you wrote a great blog post yesterday at Cyber Reason that's already been dropped, that link, explaining the importance of inclusive language and changing the language that's used in documentation, in products, in our lectures, and in training. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that, because I think it's such an important part of our growth as a society, and a realization that these things matter. And the hitting is a good one, right? Like, no hitting, please. Let's use press instead of hitting. And I think it's important to discuss that. So what are your thoughts there?
Oh, let's do this. Let me see if I can also tie and transition these topics in one other way, just to say that I feel like our community is incredibly supportive of one another. And if I say community and you're somebody who's watching this and you say, I don't know anybody in forensics.
But you're here. You're here today. You're part of the community.
Here, so you are part of the community, period.
That's it. That's it. 100%. Like, DFIR is an amazing community. And if you're here and you're interested, you are part of that community. When we say that term, it includes you at the moment that you listen, or you dive into your first text, or you look at you go to your first talk, or you pick up your first forensics book. At that moment, you are part of this community. Sorry.
Yes. So welcome.
Welcome to the community.
I'm going to share a little bit about the person who brought me into the community. And this is in one of these classes I was taking after I got my degree. I was working in a bicycle shop, and I shared a little bit about this in my SANS DFIR keynote, where I said, I was working in a bicycle shop, and I used those same skills as a SOC analyst more recently in my career. But one of the classes I took was at the Harvard Extension School. So Harvard has a night school,
yes.
And they are open to the community. And it was a class on technology, policy, and law.
Ooh.
Now, this is very relevant to what I'm doing today, but more importantly, there were 2 instructors in the class. It was one of the first teletaught co-classes, if this is the right way of describing it. So I was in my classroom in Cambridge, Massachusetts on the Harvard campus, and there was a second section of the class that was sitting in the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. Jessica, do you know who that instructor was at NPS?
Was it Simpson? Simpson Garfinkel? Has to be. Like, there was no doubt in my mind. What an amazing person. I actually was having an email conversation with Simpson just yesterday. We spoke last week. He's incredible, brilliant. I've crossed paths. We worked in the same lab for a period of time. Just brilliant. One of the most brilliant men you'll ever meet. He also teaches at George Mason University now. He's working for the Census Bureau, solving really hard problems. Absolute genius. Absolute genius. And to have him co-teach that class for you, I can completely understand how you would fall in love with DFIR at that moment. Like, I just, even and not in a DFIR class. I love it.
Jessica, I am not even at the good part yet.
I'm sorry. I'm just elated already.
Well, in hindsight, I am as well, right? But here's the thing is, I knew Simpson's name. Like, I'm like, okay, here's a person who's been in the field a long time. I had in my classroom, as I've been telling this story, I don't know if she wants to be named, so I will leave her name out, but she knows who she is. I had a retired FBI cybercrime agent teaching my section of the classroom in person in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So as I got to know her, talking after class, sharing, I really love what we're studying here. We're studying so many different things like laws and how does Bitcoin mining affect an online ecosystem and all of these wide-ranging things. And she said, I understand you have this degree and you're trying to find your place in the tech community. I think forensics might be a good fit for you. And I know somebody who's teaching classes just down the road at this community college. Why don't you reach out to them
Oh,
and see
wow.
what's going on? So again, think about if I've been in the field for over a decade, how experienced this person had to be for her to have retired from the
Yes,
cybercrime
absolutely. Absolutely.
and to have her as an instructor. So that was my pull into the community. And that was just the opening door that I needed. So anyway, I want to stress the inclusivity in this community. And let's talk about ways to do even better, because we're not here to pat
Yes.
ourselves on the
No,
back,
that's
right?
exactly it. We're always growing. We're always doing better. We're always growing both technically, where we have to meet the new challenges, but we also have to grow in the way that we do things, right? It's that whole I did that DFIR hierarchy of needs thing, right? Like you have your foundation of learning, and then the next step is you do your independent casework, and then the next step is you start sharing, and the next step is you start giving back. But part of that also is the realization that not everything you've ever done is perfect. There are lots of things that, from a technical perspective, you go, oh my gosh, I wish I understood shell bags better when I wrote that report 5 years ago, and I wouldn't have made that assertion so clearly. But it's also in the way that we presented ourselves, or the words that we used, or the choices we made and who we put on a panel. Figuring out those things and how we can be better with those things is also part of that growth, because we're always growing, it's always changing, and it's always figuring out the new way for you to grow. And sometimes it's easier if you already start that way, because sometimes we don't even know. Just like we say, you don't know what you don't know from a technical perspective. We don't know what we don't know from a social perspective. If you're not exposed, there's no way to know. And so we have to accept those things the exact same way and look at our past work the exact same way when we learn something new about how an artifact or a trace can be committed. Does that make sense? Did I just create yeah, sorry.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. Yes, and that's very much like what your talk was about, by the way, with the learning at scale. If you guys, I know that the SANS DFIR Summit started putting out videos yesterday. They didn't publish yours yet. I checked this morning because I was going to link it. But they've put about 7 of them out yesterday, so I assume that they're going to be going out throughout the week. If you can check that talk out, please do.
Yeah. I've got things to say. Let's go. So yeah, so this is, even at Cybereason that I've been at for the last 2 years, I'm in my third position here. I started as a SOC analyst, so, somebody who really loves and teaches about low-level Windows forensics. And I'm usually working a case for, let's say a week at a time plus. I love that deep dive. I came in, I got a change of pace. I started doing triage on incidents rapidly, in this space of endpoint detection and response, where you're doing things, you're addressing intrusions every 5 minutes, 15 minutes, every hour, So learned a lot from that experience. And I started to think, I was already teaching for SANS and teaching forensics and trying to figure out where else I grow in my career. So I moved into our product organization, and I've since moved. I'm currently under our office of the CISO, where I get to do kind of more broad education stuff and policy stuff. And anyway, this whole time I've been here, I've had this thought in the back of my mind of, this is kind of odd that we're using terms like blacklist and whitelist in our software. And this is something that it took me a while to really put my finger on why this felt odd. And it really boils down to the basic idea of, why is something black bad and why is something white good? So this blog post that you're mentioning that I put on the Cybereason blog the other day shares you know what? This is language that, when you really think about it, has some undertones that are not inclusive. So if we want to just go there, we can say racist undertones. Things in our technical community, we'll see this in other ways. Things like the idea of a master-slave relationship between drives. Now, there are definitely other terms that are more technically accurate that don't have those underlying implications and kind of assertions of like black is bad, white is good, master slave. Oh, that
right.
When I share these things with people outside of tech, they go, master slave is a term that's used in technology, like regularly? Why on earth is that? So anyway, this is a long way of saying, as our industry has evolved, there are ways that we can be more technically accurate, but also more inclusive. Things that don't rely on outdated, I could say this 20 different ways, but I'm going to say outdated terminology.
There we go.
Kind of leave it at that
that makes sense. I actually just shared a link as Magnet, and I put it as from Jessica because I want to be really clear that Magnet wasn't sharing this link, that it was me. And I can't drop links unless I do it as Magnet. But I just shared the link for the Center for Democracy and Technology, although I typed democracy wrong when I just typed that. I apologize, guys. But this is the Ietf suggestions for language. And if you are interested in that, that actually gives actual suggestions for replacements of terminology. And this is something I've been looking at. And like I said, Magnet's also taking steps to make corrections. So like instead of master slave, you can use primary replica, active standby, primary worker. There's lots of different relationships, writer-reader, depending on what you're talking about, right? And then for whitelist, blacklist, you can do things like allow list, block list, pass list. There's lots of other terminology that can be used, and it's just a great document because if this is something you are interested in, it's a great resource with different terms.
Okay. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm coming up. No. I'm just coming up. If I look like I'm processing or like waiting, there are two big things that came to mind that I so want to pull out of what you just shared. And one of those deals with NIST, and the other one deals with the Ietf. So, okay, with NIST, if you look up, I'll share some kind of hesitation I've gotten around making these changes for greater conversations I've been having. And one thing that I've heard is, well, we subscribe to the NIST 800 whatever standard for this framework for cybersecurity recommendations, and they use these terms. Well, me being the kind of person who has a strange fascination for going through hundreds of page-long PDF documents and reading the footnotes. I will always read the footnotes or endnotes, or I come up with some great rabbit holes doing that. I traced back one of these specifications that talked about, well, here's how you set up this network appliance. It deals with blacklists, Check the footnotes, see where that reference is. And I came up with this amazing onion. I was peeling back about 6 documents deep, going back over a decade to where blacklist was described as a synonym for hot list. And long story short, these definitions evolved over time, and all of the documents today that are current and live don't even reference we think it means today when we're talking about a block list. So anyway, that's one of my personal rabbit holes. If you need somebody to read the footnotes, I'm your guy.
So I do also want to mention that there are other documentations of standards where people can publicly comment. So for example, Software Working Group on Digital Evidence, the SWGDE, is having their annual workshop right now this week. But they do lots of publications on forensic standards and methodologies and standard operating procedures. But what's great about that organization is they put their documents up for public comment. And I have definitely given public comment on documents that have been posted by SWGD, and I encourage everyone to, because this is the opportunity for you as a member of this community to have your voice heard on the definitions, technology, and terminology that we're using as an industry. So there are opportunities for you, no matter where you are in your career, to have your voice heard on your thoughts there.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. And I just learned something. I learned that SWGD is the pronunciation of, I can picture it right now, SWD.
GDE. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing the acronym correctly.
Yeah.
SWGDE. Yeah.
Let's go with it. Yeah. I love that. I learned about the pronunciation for WECs the other day. Women in Cybersecurity is WECs. So
I like that. Well,
constantly
we actually had this conversation earlier because I asked about the correct pronunciation for the acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And I asked if it was BIPOC because I wasn't sure. And these are all things where we all have to learn and grow in terms of asking those things, right?
By the way, one thing that I think has helped me be more secure in the things that I do know is hearing people say, hey, I didn't know about that. I don't know.
Absolutely.
So me sharing something like Linux forensics, I will look at a file system, but I am not your expert in that. Just because I know forensics and I do all these things and I teach it, doesn't mean that I can tell you about this thing in the cloud in Azure. Anyway.
But you know who to go to who does have that information so that you can learn it and apply it and find out.
Exactly.
And that is also key, right? And as you say those things, like I think not only of my, like where I would Google or what I would go look at, but I also think of the people who I know I would look for their talks and their presentations because you said Linux forensics and my brain went Ali Hadi, right? Like there's people who you associate with a topic who you know who have great, there's actually quite a few great Linux forensics things out there, and I am actually forgetting how to pronounce somebody's name, so I am not going to name them right now, but there is somebody else who has great Linux forensics work, and that is where I feel bad, but it's really good to know where those resources are. And ask somebody, do you know what a good resource is for? And it's not my area of expertise, but I know who is, and I know that their books and their references are where I would go.
Absolutely. So I defer to people. I like deferring to people who share information, who, revise it over time. The Center for Democracy and Technology you just mentioned, the Ietf standard. So there is an Ietf RFC, request for comments, that is open, written by Mallory Nodell. And I have talked to Mallory. I want to give her credit as somebody who's doing a lot of work in this space in inclusive language and looking at replacement terms. And I forget where else I was going to go with this, but so how do we affect change at scale? You and I have had lots of conversations about DFIR for good, hashtag DFIR for good, right? And this is something that has been talked about a lot over the past few months, particularly for people who might be watching internationally, or if you are watching this after we are talking live. A lot of this conversation about inclusive language has sprung up and become broader in the context of a lot of Black Lives Matter conversations and racial and social justice, and in the wake of George Floyd's murder earlier this year in 2020. So I mentioned that I had been thinking about terms and terminology within my own organization for quite a while. And it's something that came to the surface in this greater conversation that at the organization, we were able to address because of things happening in the news in the United States and greater awareness. So this is, I think, where I'm moving next in forensics, which is I am really good at bits and bytes. I will stare at hex and I will look at a stream of data and I'll go, there is something here. I don't know what it is, but this kind of pattern matching is something that I love. I love forensics. How our field is always changing is super exciting to me, right? That's exciting to me, and I think I'm pretty good at it. So what? What's next? So I'm very fortunate that I'm in a spot where I'm able to start contributing my expertise as somebody who, let's say, a lot of my education in the last year in my professional development has been doing things at the speed of business, being able to have business level conversations in addition to technical ones. So I was taking a class recently on management and security leadership. And I shared that with a forensics class I was teaching. And I got a few students asking me, I don't understand. I'm trying to be a forensic expert like you. Why are you taking management classes? I'm like, well, yeah, and I very much appreciated that question because it gave me an opportunity to share. You and I can talk about bits and bytes, and we can talk about how to present that to a court or to opposing counsel. But how do you affect greater change? And this is that for good conversation that's been coming up in our industry. And I think there are lots and lots and lots of ways to do it. I suspect that everybody listening right now, and again, the time we're having this conversation is September 2020. It's the beginning of the school year for many parts of the United States. I've reached out to all of my friends who are teachers, particularly elementary, middle school, high school, and I've said, hey, I know you might be trying to figure out some technological things as you teach your classes remotely. How can I help you out?
Yes.
How can I help you find that screen share application? Do you need another computer? I'm sure I could find a spare that I could loan you, whatever that is. So we can all affect one-on-one change. I can teach a class of people, but how do I take that into a bigger conversation?
Yes, the scale.
Figure out, right? I am having conversations, like I said, with people at the Ietf who are trying to make our industry more inclusive. And I'm talking, this is like not even a cybersecurity organization. This is like a technical, what do I call the Ietf? A trade organization?
A trade organization for technology and engineering.
Exactly. So something that's a very broad STEM-focused organization, How can I work with them to affect the conversations that we're having in our field? How can I work with lawmakers?
Yes.
And I've been pulled into some incredible conversations about the EU and tariffs and cybersecurity regulations. And how can I affect, as somebody who has access to lawmakers and policymakers, how can we open up standards for cybersecurity, for doing forensics, for the people we bring into our pipeline? And this is an open question. I don't have the answer, but I'm trying to explore, how do I do this at scale and make a bigger difference?
No, and it's really a good point. I mean, Magnet just launched the Oxtera project, and we're going to be talking about that tomorrow on a social hour if you happen to be watching this real time. If not, you can go to oxtera.com. And the whole purpose of that platform is to try to match people who want to do DFIR for good with organizations that need those kinds of assistance. And I'm really intrigued by the different types of help that could be done. And the whole goal is to bring it to scale. The whole goal is to have different people and be able to do that matching and correlation to be able to help with the scale of it. There have been so many people who have been really promoting DFIR for good. And if you can get, when that keynote's released from Matt Mitchell from the DFIR Summit, when the keynote is the talk from Lee Whitfield about how he's doing this locally with defense teams in his area. That talk just went out. A lot of people are now thinking about this, and how I've got a bunch of resources in that blog I wrote about the hierarchy of DFIR needs. And I just love that people are coming together with this, because you're right. There's that whole act locally, think globally. It's putting that think globally part on it, so we can figure out how to make it easy for people to get involved, so they just can give the time and not have to worry about the organization and the structure behind it. And I love that you're trying to solve that problem, and solve that problem with a variety of organizations, because I know so many groups that are doing little pieces of the puzzle. Right? Like Cyber Sleuths is really working on bringing women and underrepresented minorities at the high school age into digital forensics, right, to learn about it, and they do cyber camps about it. And you did a great cyber camp with SANS. I didn't even mention that in your bio over the summer. By the way, my son loved it. My son went to your talk, and he loved it. My teenager, and I just think that there are so many people doing so many great things, and we need that cohesion. We need to figure out that scale, and I think that you're right. It's a great problem to solve. I just love everything you're doing there.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Technology and Social Change Research Project?
Absolutely. So with all of these things on my plate right now, and I don't know if we mentioned, I've contributed to This Week in Forensics with Phil Moore, and I've recently stepped back from that to try and work on some other projects.
Yeah.
One of these, this is a little bit full circle.
I feel like I should just prompt that maybe somebody should help Phil. Maybe somebody should volunteer to take over the threat hunting and malware sections to assist Phil in that massive work that he puts out every week. But I'm sorry, I'll set that aside. If any listener, but Phil is not. As far as I know, Phil is not looking for volunteers, so he's probably going to kill me when he hears me say that. But I think somebody should volunteer to help him.
Yes. Yeah. So let's see. What am I doing with the Technology and Social Change Project? Well, I'll share what the project is. It's a program out of Harvard University, out of the Kennedy School. So a little bit full circle here, going to night school there, joining the program back at Harvard. They work on technology and media in the sense of identifying misinformation. Oh. So how does misinformation spread on Facebook, through forums, and focusing on a lot of topics that are very relevant to today? For example, election security. What are things that are circulating on social media right now around voting, and how you should vote and how you shouldn't vote? And are those things correct? And how do you fact check that? On around COVID and the pandemic, it's the same thing, sharing information about how is this transmitted? How do you keep yourself safe? And by the way, if there's information out there that's not correct, maybe it's on a website or a news site that is sharing incorrect information, how is that spreading? So I think I'm one of the most
technical. It's detecting and also understanding, right? You have to understand how it's happening as well. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
It's from a technological perspective is what I'm saying. It's not just the social understanding, that there's technology problems there that need to be solved.
Exactly. So how is that being distributed? If Facebook wanted to stop misinformation in campaign ads, how technologically could it do it? Let's think about this. So I'm contributing some of that technical expertise along with a team of people who are primarily social scientists and researchers in fields that are non-technical. So if you look at most of the staff, they are people who are researchers, who are journalists, led by Joan Donovan, who has a PhD in talking about far-right organizations and how they organize online. How do things like misinformation and things spread on the internet? So it's a really unique, amazing group of people, and particularly with the election coming up in the United States, I'm there to plug in for whatever they need. If they see malware that's spreading tied to some campaign that's purportedly from QAnon, what can I tell them about how this affects the current thing that they're seeing,
Right.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
That's really, really
cool program.
That is really, really, really cool. And I love the fact that this also kind of ties into that policy in the context for DFIR for good, right? I really do see a tie in there, and I think that's really cool. this isn't the only kind of area where you're doing research. I know you've been doing a lot of research in stalkerware. You spoke about this at RSA in 2019. Is there anything that you can tell us about kind of that research and what you're doing in terms of stalkerware? Did we lose Lodrina? Oh, there she is.
Oh, I'm back. Okay.
You're back. That was like a half a second. It was perfect.
Awesome. So, okay, and stalkerware. Yes. I will say I wrote a blog post for RSA. I have yet to speak at that conference.
Oh, I apologize. It was a post. I apologize. Yes.
Yes. Although I will say that the RSA call for presentations is open right now, so I'm hoping next year to speak.
Wonderful.
Yeah, around stalkerware. So, yeah, I'm working with a volunteer organization called Operation Safe Escape. Mm-hmm. And they help victims of technologically facilitated abuse basically get safe. So if there's stalkerware implanted on their device, volunteers can make recommendations about, hey, have you checked your sync settings? Is your iCloud synced to someplace else where an abuser might be able to access your data as you're trying to free yourself from their presence? And it's something where I'm still trying to find, again, talking about the most change possible, right?
Right.
How do I help them out and continue to do all of these other things? So currently, I'm actually helping out, I think, the most I can by not looking at data and working with people who are survivors of this kind of abuse and stalking, but using like, hey, I know somebody at this cybercrime lab. I think we need to escalate this to law enforcement. Let me put you in touch with the right contact at this law enforcement organization who can help you out. So
I think that's like so incredible, and it really sounds like an interesting place where people with our skill set can make those connections, and maybe not in the binary, but can make those connections of when law enforcement should be involved, and maybe give some steps for people to validate things beforehand. And so that really makes a lot of sense. I think that's really cool. And I actually just found and dropped the link for Operation Safe Escape in there, in the links there. No, that's really cool. I love that you're doing that. And in terms of scale, I mean, maybe you're helping with scale by talking about this right here. Because maybe you don't need to be the person who's in the bits and bytes, but maybe you need to be introducing people who have this passion and can dig into the bits and bytes to the fact that these opportunities exist. And, we were having this conversation and I was saying, I'm really interested now in introducing this organization as maybe one of the possible organizations for the Oxterra project when we were talking earlier. So I think even our conversation today, I think you're handling part of your scale problem. And that's a kind of a neat thing, bringing that full circle.
Yeah, and kind of realizing, hey, I don't need to solve this problem.
No,
but I can elevate the issue. You don't bring this conversation to other places.
You don't need to necessarily solve a problem by being the person who solves it. You can be part of the solution by connecting the disjointed pieces that need to be put together to get to the solution. And you are doing more than that, but it's just a good reminder to people that there's so many different ways that you can help in a solution. So you not only have been an amazing advocate and doing all of these amazing things here, but you also have an event coming up in 15 days or 16 days, October 1. You have the BIPOC Security Forum, which I just learned about. I just saw Sans tweeting about it this last week, and I registered right away. Can you talk a little bit about that event? Because it looks like you're hosting it and keynoting and doing quite a bit involved with it.
Yeah, I should probably put some slides together for that. I'll get there. Yeah, so I am very fortunate to be working with Sans, and SANS is the kind of organization where I teach for them. I've brought up issues of inclusive language earlier with them. And I always knew, kind of deep down, that something would be done to address my concerns, I had no idea that we would actually be talking about it publicly. I just thought, like, there's good people there. We will take care of this. But SANS is really stepping up by hosting this free event on October 1st. And we're going to be talking about how do we make cybersecurity more inclusive. If you are somebody who is from a traditionally underrepresented background, whether that is gender, whether that is race, whether that is any of the other characteristics that I think when we talk about diversity, maybe we don't always talk about, how can we be more inclusive to people of different physical abilities?
Yes.
Whatever it is that maybe makes a person underrepresented in our community. We're going to be talking about that and the steps that we as members of the community can take. And what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to be sharing some things that, as I alluded to, SANS is doing to make that process more inclusive. For example, trying to change our language to be more inclusive so that we don't have microaggressions experienced by people who are sitting in class trying to learn, distracted by this language doesn't sit right with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you're taking a SANS class and you've got that fire hose of information coming, that is not a time to feel overwhelmed by language that doesn't necessarily need to be there, because there's so much content to take in. Especially you're sitting in Lodrina's class; she's giving you a fire hose of information, y'all. You can take 400 or 500 with Lodrina, and she'll get you down into the bits and bytes. and definitely help you feel overwhelmed completely by technical content. You don't need to feel overwhelmed by microaggressions. So I think that's an important change. I love that that's happening. And I'm really excited about the conference because I feel like I'm going to learn so much about ways that I can do a little bit better each day. And that's the whole goal every day, just to find one more way to do something a little bit better. And if we all did that, oh my gosh, the world would just be a better place, right? If everybody just did a little bit better each day. So you mentioned, we talked about the Forensic Wiki and This Week in Forensics, which were two projects that you really contributed to. They're big, well-known resources. What is your go-to resource?
Oh, well, I have, for the last year and a half, a really easy answer to this question.
Okay.
Which is, while I was contributing to This Week in Forensics with Phil Moore, all of the links I was looking at every week through threat hunting and malware, a lot of them are things that I need in my daily job. So if I am searching for the latest information on Maze ransomware or MITRE Shield, we were just talking about before this call.
We were.
I do a little bit of Google. Okay, what is on the site This Week in Forensics? And I know that there was something about this piece of malware that somebody just asked me a question about. So, contributing, volunteering my time to help go through and sort through all of these news links. And oh my gosh, y'all, keep it up, keep blogging. There's so much content in there. But yeah, that was my way to search and look through a lot of relevant information. I have to admit, it is not possible to keep up with everything in the forensics community. It's simply not possible.
That's what's great about the categories.
And even things like, I haven't watched, I know that they're free, all of the Magnet videos from your summit this year.
And then we're having a 2-day summit today and tomorrow, which also is, so now you've got a bigger library.
I know. I mean, the great thing is there's so much content to go through, but it is not possible for any one person
to go through. You've got to choose what you need. I'm a big believer in just-in-time forensics. That is that the reason that it's so important that you publish a resource isn't so somebody sees it the day you publish it. It's so that the resource is available at the moment you need it. When you come across zoom on a case, when you come across how do I determine what applications were installed, when you come across, oh, this is my first Linux box, that's when you go to those resources, and it's about having them available. And this week in forensics, I search it all the time to find the latest and current information on a topic. Absolutely.
Yes. So that's my go-to. I'll give a shout out to Ilan, who was on the other week. I've been directing people to DFIR Diva. I've been directing people to about DFIR.
And we had Devin on last week.
Yep. So kudos to everybody there. I think those are great sites that I share in a lot of starting forensics conversations. And I'll add one last one, which is CyberSeek, cyberseek.org.
I do not know this.
People who are trying to get into not just forensics, but who are trying to get into cybersecurity. I've been sharing that a lot as like, what kind of advice can I share for somebody looking to get into cybersecurity that fits in one tweet? And there's a great map of, I want to be an investigator, think forensics.
Well, this is actually really cool.
I'm
looking at this.
Isn't that neat?
So they have these interactive, I've never looked at this. They have this interactive career pathway roadmap. And not only does it tell you as you highlight what the different subspecialties are, what the entry-level positions are, the mid-level and the advanced level, but if you highlight over them, it tells you the number of job openings and average salary for those positions. And I'm looking at an incident analyst responder right now, and it's telling you common job titles, the type of education, the certifications that are requested. This is an amazing site. I am so sad I didn't know about this before. This is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone who's listening, check this website out, cyberseek.org. This is just absolutely incredible. You can look at penetration and vulnerability testers and then see their different cybersecurity roles that are adjacent to them, that feed into them, that can grow out of them. This is just really cool. It tells you the top skills that are required. So like here it's saying you need Linux and Python and Java and penetration testing and software development. This is brilliant. That's a brilliant site. Oh, I'm so sorry. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that resource. Everybody should go check that out. Which brings me to the last thing that I'd like to know today. We have a couple minutes left from this pathway. What is your advice to someone who's looking to get into the field?
If you're looking to get into the field and you're listening to this, well done, because you've already found, a great resource. Yeah. And, for somebody to go to Magnet Forensics or to go to any of these webinars we've mentioned, which a lot of them happen to be free this year, free and virtual,
Absolutely.
Tying it back to language, I like just listening to things about I shared earlier, I'm not an expert at Linux forensics or let's say cloud acquisitions, but every once in a while I'll put on a podcast or I'll put on a webinar about these topics. So I start to understand the language around them, and hearing Jessica and I talking about digital forensics and DFIR, if you didn't know that DFIR, we commonly say DFIR, relates to digital forensics, and that's your starting point on what you've learned, awesome.
Right.
Listening and learning, absorb what you can, right? What a great place to start.
I love it.
I will share also, other than that, whatever you're into, if you go deep on something, whether it's forensics or not, I like this example of what you need to do to apply for a job on America's Test Kitchen, which, for those who aren't aware, is this cooking show where if they were trying to make the perfect chocolate chip cookie, they would be testing every variable. What if I use 50 more grams of flour? And what if I use this brand of chocolate chips? And what if I bake it for 10 more minutes, in their application to get a job there, they are going to misrepresent the muffin. It's something like, make your perfect blueberry muffin. So if I was trying to give advice to somebody trying to get into the field, I would say, find your blueberry muffin or whatever it is. Go deep on, for me, it's powerlifting. Whatever your passion is, go deep on that, because as you encounter problems, as you come up with new solutions, I think whatever it is you're working on can absolutely tie back into the field. So
Yes.
do your thing, enjoy it, be proud of it, have fun.
Oh, I love that. Such true advice. Go deep in the things you love. Go deep in the things you're passionate about, and it's going to help you and it's going to bring you there. And that is just such a beautiful way to look at any career path and any way of learning, and just being really receptive and listening and hearing all there is that's out there, which is, you already said, it's impossible to hear it all, but finding those things that are of interest in perfecting your blueberry muffin. Thank you. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Lodrina. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you, as it always is. I can't wait to come to Boston again. I love coming to Boston and getting to see you and having a good meal. So hopefully one day soon we'll be able to do that again. And just thank you so much for everything. You're such a love. You're wonderful. You do so much for this community and you're doing so much good. And I love the fact that you're doing it at scale. Thank you, Lodrina.
Thank you.
Everyone, I hope that you're able to join us next week. We will have Shelly Geisbrecht, otherwise known as Nerdiosity on Twitter, on as our guest, who is a phenomenal and fun person. I can't wait for next week to get to sit down and chat with her. And that'll be followed by a whole bunch of amazing people we have coming up. Everyone from Mitch Kaiser to Jad Sliba to Veronica Schmidt to Shanna Daly, Rob Duhart, Geraldine Blay. So I really hope you join us and look forward to seeing you next time on Cash Up. Bye.